Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Low Spec Labs. This video is a month overdue. Honestly, I'm gonna stop promising timelines, mostly because I have found myself incapable of keeping them. From now on, I'm not gonna make promises I feel like I won't be able to keep because of life's problems. This is my second attempt at shooting this video because my first attempt, after editing and uploading it, I didn't like it too much. It was up for about half a day before I took it down and got about 8 views. I decided I was gonna sit down and script the video out like I did the first 2 parts and then shoot it and take it from there. Hopefully you guys like this one a lot more than my first failed attempts. For those who saw it, and for those who didn't, be glad you didn't. It wasn't very good. So let's go ahead and get started. What we're trying to do is use our Proxmox host on Hetzner to host websites. In order to do this, you'll need a couple of things. First, you'll need a domain name. In my case, I am using Cloudflare. You can use your own domain provider, GoDaddy, whatever. If you don't have money to spend on a domain provider, I've already thought of a solution for you. So what is DuckDNS? DuckDNS is a free dynamic DNS hosted on AWS. DuckDNS basically gives you a random domain name, and then you can point that domain name to a server using a dynamic DNS service. Then once that dynamic DNS service updates your free DNS record with your IP address, you can proceed from there. I'm going to make another video that kind of walks you how to go through that, but that is not the purpose of this video, so we're not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to assume you're using Cloudflare. So for those of you who are lucky enough to use Cloudflare as your DNS provider, this should be an easy video for you. For those of you who are not using Cloudflare, you might have to do some Google searching to figure out how to get your IP address tied to your domain name. Once you've done that, you can then proceed from step 2, which is setting up your reverse proxy and opening ports. So let's go ahead and let's get started here. In our previous video, we had just this pfSense guest set up right here. And this pfSense guest is acting as our gateway for our guest network. All right. And it sits between the guest network and our DMZ. And right now, if we wanted to have guests or users on the internet reach out to our guest network, we would have to enable port 80 or whatever port number on our Proxmox host. We then also have to enable port 80 on our pfSense guest. And then we'd have to configure double NAT rules as well to allow the traffic to go from here to here, to here, to here, to back here, to back here, to back there. Our traffic will basically be taking something like 6 steps to make that journey from us to our guest, and 2 or 3 of those steps would be virtually on an internal guest network. That's very hard to configure and troubleshoot. So instead of doing all that, we're going to do it another way. What we're going to do is configure this host right here, which is a reverse proxy. Basically, what a reverse proxy does is sit on the internal facing, or, I guess you'd say corporate facing side of the network, and it reaches out to internal resources on behalf of guests based on the URL, and you will configure the URL for the websites on the reverse proxy itself. The benefit of that is then you only have to open up one port, which is the initial port itself, and then you just have to forward traffic to that reverse proxy from the internet. So traffic would be taking a trip like this, where it goes from the internet, heading to port 80 on the Proxmox host. Once it hits port 80 on the Proxmox host, it's then going to get forwarded to Virtual Bridge 1, and from Virtual Bridge 1 all the way to the caddy reverse proxy. Then the caddy is going to reach out to these guests, or then the reverse proxy is going to reach out to these guests on behalf of the random user, and then it's going to respond back directly to the random user using the IP address. Remember, on our Virtual Bridge 1, we have another gateway. right? And this is just an internal default gateway. So we're going to be using that to send our traffic back. So let's go ahead and let's talk about configuring that. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and let's proceed here. The very first thing we're going to do is install Caddy. I already have a server set up that I was using for testing before. I'm going to walk through the whole entire install process with you. The first thing you should think of when installing Caddy is whether or not you're going to install it in a VM or container. I like to install it in a container because it is lightweight. If you do want the reverse proxy service to be highly available, let's say you have multiple, Hetzner servers collected in a cluster, then I would make it a virtual machine. But since I only have one host and I'm using this inside that host, I'm only going to have just that container. Let's go ahead and let's get started. We create a new container, right? I'll call this 300. We'll call this Caddy. We give it a password, and then we went ahead and we hit next. Then we assign a template. I'm going to use the ABN standard. We then choose a disk. We're going to install it locally. I'm going to give it 32 gigs of storage. We're going to give it 2 CPUs. We're going to give it 1 gig of RAM, which is more than enough for this service. The network part is where things get interesting. So all containers need a network interface defined to it for it to get started. So we're going to assign this to virtual bridge 1, which is our DMZ. We're going to call this ETH0. We're going to give this an IP of 10.0.30.40/24, 10.0.31 for the gateway. DNS is to Cloudflare, and got that wrong. After that, we then enter our domain name, vlan.org, and we enter our DNS. And we go ahead and we click finish. We're not starting the server after it's completed because we still have one more thing. We have to add our additional interface. So we go back to network, we go back to add, we call this ETH1, and then 10.0.20.40/24. So it has access to internal networks. And then we assign this to the guest LAN. Might have to refresh real quick. There we go. Now we can spin this server up. And the first thing we're going to want to do after it spins up is test and make sure we have internet access. This server's default gateway should be in the DMZ. And it should be pointing to, there we go. It should be pointing to the Proxmox host itself and using that as the gateway. So we're going to verify that by logging into the server and doing some pings. So root, we log in, and then we ping Google to see if we can have a connection. Cool. And then the first thing we want to do is update, and upgrade the server. And then while it's doing that, the next thing we want to do is go to caddyserver.docs.install, and we're going to copy some scripts. So go ahead and scroll down to Debian, Ubuntu, and Raspbian. And then what we're going to do is we're going to copy this. You don't need the sudo portion, so apt install. This is adding the caddy repo, or adding the caddy repo key. We'll let that run. After that, we're going to add the repository keys. So we want to paste this command, and we want to remove the sudo because the user we're using is root, and there is no sudo command install on this host. Gonna have to install curl first. Now let's try that. Cool. And we just updated the caddy file. After that, we add the repo, and we get rid of this sudo as well. And then after that, we can run another apt-get update and install caddy. Perfect. So we now have caddy server installed and ready to go, and we can verify it installed by doing a systemctl start caddy, and then a status caddy. You can see it's running, and of course we want this to run when the host boots up, so don't forget to enable the service. Cool, perfect. And with that, we've just got caddy server or our reverse proxy installed, and we can proceed from there. The next step is we then have to go to the Proxmox host, and from the Proxmox host, port forward ports 80 and 443 to the caddy server. So let's see what the IP address of this caddy server is. It is 1030.40. So what we then do is we go back to our Proxmox host, use nano, etc network interfaces. And just like before, where we had our rules on Virtual Bridge 1 to give our VMs LAN access or internet access, we now have to put rules on Virtual Bridge 0 to allow the internet to reach our VMs. So these are the rules we're going to use to give guests access to internal resources. Let's break down this rule a little bit. I left some variables in there to make it easier to explain. So we're adding an IP tables rule after Virtual Bridge 0 is up. That rule is a NAT rule. That rule adds a pre-routing rule for TCP traffic destined for an interface. And this is where you would put Virtual Bridge 0. And then we wanted to find the port. In my case, it's 443 for SSL traffic, right? Destination NAT 2, and then we enter the internal IP address of our caddy server. So that's 10.0.30.40. Then we come back to the second rule. The second rule is a post routing rule. So again, we're adding a post routing NAT rule. Destination for an outgoing interface. Again, we changed this to VMBR0. Destination port is 443. Destination IP, so the IP that should be coming out is 10.0.30.40. And then we change the source back again to our Proxmox IP, which is 135.161. Well, my Proxmox IP, yours is going to be different. All right, so we then paste our Proxmox IP. That's what we need to allow SSL traffic through. With caddy, in order for us to get SSL certs, we have to have both ports 80 and 443 open. So here's what we do. We go ahead and we add the exact same rule, but for port 80. Paste. And then we get it pasted here. And then when you're done, you'll do an if reload -a. And then of course you can use an IP tables dash, it should be VL, right, to see our rules. Let's see. All right, cool. So let's continue. I have Cloudflare pulled up and I have my domain pulled up. What you want to do is open Cloudflare, go to sites, click one of your sites, go to DNS, then go to records. In my case, I've made a new record, GNS3 .lowspeclabs.org. I entered the IP of my Proxmox host down here, and I made sure to turn off Cloudflare proxy. If you're using caddy server, for the initial handshake for it to confirm that you're serving out of that IP address, you have to have Cloudflare proxy turned off. Once you get your SSL cert, you can go ahead and turn it back on. It'll do the renew handshake just fine. But for that initial handshake, you need to have your proxy status set to off in Cloudflare. If you're not using Cloudflare, this doesn't apply to you. You can just go ahead and go forward. But I thought this might be useful for some users. So let's go to our test caddy host right here, number 300. And let's open its caddy config file. So what we do is we go to nano, etc caddy file. Caddy server uses YAML to make its config files. So what that means is if we want to make changes to it, all we have to do is comment this stuff out, which is our first site definition. First, we define our website. So https://gns3.lowspeclabs.org. So, and then we use these colons or these brackets to define our file. From there, we're going to use spaces to define our other directives. So you go one space, and then you use reverse proxy, because we're going to use the reverse proxy directive. Okay, cool. So here's what we do. We enter our reverse proxy, then we enter the URL of the website we want to go to. So that would be http paste That would be 30, 30, 20, 30. Right. And then another directive just to close that off. And then, of course, we want to log. So what you want to do is enter another directive. So what this does is it logs traffic as it hits that website so we can troubleshoot connectivity issues or any other issues we might have with the site. So we do log, we close it out, and then, of course, we define our log file. So what I'm going to do is close this. Right. Output file var log caddy GNS3. All right, perfect. And then we close the caddy file. So next we have to validate our caddy file. To validate our caddy file, we do caddy validate -- config /etc caddy file. As we can see, caddy file is not formatted. Okay. So it's saying our file isn't formatted properly. So here's what we can do. So we can do caddy format -- overwrite, and then we caddy validate. And then when we go back into our caddy file, all right, cool. We can see the formatting's been changed a little bit. Then we do systemctl restart caddy, systemctl status caddy. And you can see the caddy server is running. Now when we go to gns3.lowspeclabs.org, we can see we're getting a privacy error, but the actual GNS3 website is working, right? So the site itself is working, and that's it. So in this video, we learn how to, 1, configure our domain name, 2, configure our Proxmox host so we can serve websites out, 3, configure our caddy server or reverse proxy servers so it reaches and serves those websites internally facing on our network to the internet. That's it for this video. In the next video, I'm going to show you some features you can use caddy for. Until then, thank you for watching. This should get you at least to the point where you're able to serve out websites. If you guys do fake, so caddy serves out websites using SSL certs unless the website itself is privately encrypted, right? I'm going to show you how to kind of work around that later. So, yeah. All right, boys, and that's it. That's how you serve websites using a Proxmox host and a reverse proxy. In our case, we use caddy server, but you could use something like Nginx proxy manager, I think it's called. You could use traffic. You could use Apache, because I think Apache has some reverse proxy functionality. Correct me if I'm wrong. Otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. You could also use the same rules and port forward your traffic directly to your pfSense guest. But then again, like I said earlier in the video, you would then have to do new rules every single time you wanted to do a new website. If you only have one website to serve out, that's perfectly fine. It might be a simpler setup for you. No need to spin up another VM. Otherwise, I highly suggest you go the reverse proxy route to get this problem solved. Feel free if any of you guys have figured out other ways to do this, or if you have a better solution, let me know. My next couple of videos are going to be wrapping up the caddy server features, right, and how to actually get the full Let's Encrypt cert, or how to do Cloudflare DNS challenge. Those videos should be a lot shorter, and because they're a lot shorter, it should be a lot easier for me to put them out. I'm not going to give you a time frame, just look forward to them. One more last thing before I say goodbye. Thank you. This channel is very small, And my last video has a couple hundred views, and that's thanks to you guys. And thank you for hitting the like button. Thank you for commenting. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for pointing out my mistakes. It helps me learn more and make my videos better next time. So please like, comment, and subscribe. Please feel free to let me know how and where I'm wrong, or if I could do things better. And I might make an update video if I have some time. If these videos start getting some traction, I have no problem going back and reshooting stuff. It's basically like just going through an old script again.